The boy was 9 years old and had not yet learned that some questions are rude. He walked straight up to the woman sitting on the hotel steps with one bag and no one coming for her, and he said, "Why are you sitting like nobody's coming?" The woman looked at him for a moment. She was young, 25, maybe, with dark hair that had come loose from the road and a dress that had been good once and was dust-traveled now. She was not crying. She looked, if anything, like a person who had decided that crying would not be useful and had put it somewhere she could deal with it later. She said, very quietly, "I was waiting for someone, but she's gone." The boy's father heard it from 6 feet away. He had been about to call the boy back, tell him to mind himself, the usual correction you make when a 9-year-old walks into a stranger's grief with all the subtlety of a retriever. But the words stopped before they got out, because he knew that particular way of sitting, the back still straight, the chin still up, the hands folded in the lap of someone who is holding everything together by deciding that composure is the last thing left to hold on to. He had sat exactly like that himself, twice, once in a doctor's office and once by a grave on the East Ridge at sunset, wondering how you explain to a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old that the person who made the house into a home is not coming back. His name was Samuel Arden. He was 38 years old and a widower and the father of 2 children, and he was very late for getting back to his ranch, and he stood on the main street of Redstone Falls, Colorado, in the autumn of 1886 and could not make himself walk away. What happened next, what that woman said to him, and what his children did, and what got built in the months that followed out of grief and practicality and 2 people who had lost too much, did not begin with a grand gesture or a declaration. It began with his boy asking a rude question and a woman who told the truth anyway. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now let's ride. Colorado, 1886, Redstone Falls. The kind of small town that knows everyone's business and tells it gently, because in a town that size, what goes around comes around, and everybody knows it. Nell Hadley had come west on a letter. Her Aunt Vera, her mother's sister, the only family she had left, had written from Redstone Falls 4 months ago. "There is a small house here. There is work. There is a room that is yours if you want it." Nell had sold what little remained after her father's death. He had left debts that took the house and most of what was in it, and stepped onto the train with one bag, enough money for 2 weeks, and a letter that said, "Come." Vera had died of pneumonia 11 days before Nell arrived. The hotel clerk told her with the directness of a man who dealt in practical facts and didn't know how to soften them. Nell thanked him. She asked for a room. She went upstairs, sat on the bed, and looked at the wall. In the morning, she counted her money. $1.60 a night for the room. She had enough for 3 nights. After that, she would need work, and quickly. She went downstairs and sat on the front steps because the room felt too small for what she was carrying. She was sitting there, her bag beside her and her back straight, when the boy appeared. He was 9, maybe 10, dark-haired and with his father's same direct way of looking at things. He walked up without any of the hesitation adults used when deciding whether to say anything at all. "Why are you sitting like nobody's coming?" he said. Nell blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You're sitting like nobody's going to come, like you've already decided." She looked at this child and felt, unexpectedly, something come loose at the edge of her composure. "I was waiting for someone," she said, "but she's gone." "Did they forget?" "No." She looked at her hands. "She died." The boy went quiet. For the first time, something behind his confident expression shifted into something softer and more careful. "I'm sorry," he said, and then, because he was 9 and could not help himself, "My mama died too. 2 years ago, Papa says it's like a door that doesn't close all the way. A large hand came down on the boy's shoulder. Eli! The man's voice was even. Not harsh, the voice of someone who corrects without crushing. That's enough. The boy, Eli, looked up at his father without particular guilt. I was being friendly. You were being personal. Same thing. The man looked at Nell. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the particular kind of quiet that comes not from having nothing to say, but from having learned to be careful about when you say it. He held his hat in his hands. I apologize for him, he said. He means well. He was kind, Nell said. He doesn't need to apologize. The man studied her for a moment, not rudely, with the same careful attention his son had shown, but slower, the way an adult measures things before committing to them. Samuel Arden, he said, these are my children. Eli, you've met, and Grace. A girl had appeared at his other side, 7 years old, small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and a stillness about her that made her seem older. She was looking at Nell with an expression that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, the look of a child who has learned to observe before deciding. Nell Hadley, Nell said. She told him the short version, Springfield, Missouri, her Aunt Vera, the letter, the timing. The way she told it was matter of fact. She was not asking for anything. She was answering the question that common decency required she answer when someone introduced himself and looked at her with that particular expression. When she finished, Samuel Arden was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about your aunt, he said. Vera Kell was a good woman. She was kind to my children after their mother passed. Something about this caught Nell off guard. The connection. This stranger who had known Vera, who had been the recipient of the same steadiness Nell's aunt had offered her in letters from across the country. She never mentioned, Nell started. She wouldn't have, Samuel said. That's the kind of person she was. He looked at his hat, then back at her. Do you have plans? Work? Somewhere to stay beyond the hotel? I'll find something, Nell said. With a steadiness she had been practicing since the hotel clerk told her. Samuel nodded. He didn't push. He called his children and put his hat back on and said it was good to meet her and walked away. Nell watched him go. Beside him, Eli was already talking about something else entirely. Beside him on the other side, Grace looked back once, very briefly, before turning to keep up with her father's stride. The next morning, Nell went looking for work. The general store was not hiring. The schoolhouse had its teacher. The woman who ran the dress shop had more help than she needed. The laundry, a steam-fogged building run by a woman named Mrs. Hallie Pruitt, with the brisk efficiency of someone who has not wasted emotion in 30 years, could use her, but not until the following week. Not immediately. Come back Monday, Mrs. Pruitt said, looking her over with the frank assessment of a woman who did not have time for anything but honest evaluation. You can press, I take it. Heavy work doesn't bother you. I've done heavier, Nell said. Monday then. That left 4 days and about $12 and a room that cost what it cost. That evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Eli Arden holding a covered dish with both hands, with the concentration of someone carrying something they have been specifically instructed not to drop. Papa made stew, he said. He said you might have missed supper. Behind him, at the end of the corridor, far enough back to make it clear this was not a pressure, just a delivery, Samuel Arden was looking very carefully at the wall. Nell looked at the dish, then at Eli, then at the man who had found a reason to be very interested in the wallpaper of a hotel hallway. He didn't have to do that, she said. Eli's expression suggested this was a thing adults said that he had never fully understood. Papa does lots of things he says he isn't doing, he said. He also put in the cornbread because he said you might not have had a real meal since Missouri. Nell took the dish. Her throat was tighter than she intended. "Tell him thank you," she said. "You could tell him yourself," Eli said. "He's right there." "Eli." Samuel's voice came from down the hall, without him turning around. "I'm just saying." "I know what you're just saying." Nell allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Arden," she called. He turned then, just enough, nodded once, then turned back. She closed the door and sat down and ate the best meal she'd had since Springfield, and when her hands shook a little she let them, because there was no one to see and she had been holding too much for too many days. In the morning she went to find him. He was loading feed sacks outside the grain merchant when she came around the corner. He saw her and stopped, straightforward about it, the way he did most things, not pretending he hadn't noticed, not making a performance of it either. "The hotel clerk says, 'My room has been paid through the week,'" she said. He set down the sack he was holding. "It has. I don't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's," he paused. "It's a neighbor thing. A practical thing." "It doesn't feel practical to me," Nell said. "It feels like something I owe." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him do the thing she had noticed the day before, take the measure of her, carefully, before he spoke. Not assessingly, respectfully, like he was listening even when she hadn't said the important thing yet. "All right," he said. "You'll pay me back when you're able." "I will. Then we understand each other." "We do." He went back to his sacks. She went back down the street, and both of them were aware, without saying so, that something had been established between them that was more complicated and more sturdy than either of them had language for yet. Monday came. Nell started at the laundry. The work was hard in the way of honest hard work. The steam that got into everything, the weight of wet cloth, the monotony of the iron that required concentration so you didn't burn what you were paid not to burn. Mrs. Pruitt ran a tight operation and tolerated no laziness, which suited Nell fine. She had been running her father's house since she was 14 and holding it together on the kind of budget that required creativity, and she was not afraid of hard work or long days. She was good at it. Mrs. Pruitt told her so on the third day, in the manner of someone who gives praise only when it's been thoroughly earned. "You've done this before," she said. It was not a question. "Most of my life," Nell said. "That shows." A pause. And then, because Mrs. Pruitt was a woman who kept track of things, "You've met the Arden family." "A little." "Good man, Arden. Hard 2 years for him, losing Catherine like that. Those children need—" She left it there, the way people in small towns leave things, with the blank that everyone is meant to fill in themselves. Nell pressed the shirt she was pressing and said nothing. The following week, Eli Arden appeared at the laundry window. He was theoretically there to pick up his father's shirts. He was actually there to talk. This, Nell was learning, was Eli's primary mode of operation. He used the practical errand as a vehicle for the conversation he actually wanted to have. "Grace wanted me to ask if you know how to braid hair," he said. "She doesn't, and Papa's gotten better, but he still does it too tight on one side." "Does she want to know how?" Nell said. "She wants someone who already knows how," Eli said. "There's a difference." He was 9 years old, and he was entirely correct about that. She asked Mrs. Pruitt if she could have 20 minutes. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her over her glasses and said, "Take 30, in the tone of a woman who understood things she hadn't been asked about. They sat on the bench outside. Grace had come with Eli and had arranged herself on the far end of it, close enough but not too close, with her hands folded in her lap and her hair loose and tangled, from an attempt that hadn't quite come together. "May I?" Nell said. Grace looked at her for a moment with that careful, observing gaze. Then she nodded, very slightly, and turned around. Nell worked through the tangles slowly and without pulling. She felt Grace's shoulders, which had been up around her ears when she sat down, begin very gradually to drop. Eli narrated, as Eli apparently narrated everything, the names of all 4 of their horses, the fact that their dog, a red cattle hound named Judge, had a vendetta against the left fence post for reasons no one had determined, the fact that Grace was better at arithmetic than he was, but she let him be wrong sometimes, which he felt was either very kind or very calculating. He hadn't decided. Nell listened and braided. When it was done, Grace turned around and looked at her, very seriously. "It feels even," she said. "It is even." Grace reached up with both hands and felt it, verifying. Then she looked at Nell with an expression that was not yet trust, but was the careful, cautious first step toward it. "Thank you," she said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. When they left, she turned back once at the end of the street and looked at Nell, and Nell understood that she was being assessed, and that the assessment was still ongoing, and that this was a 7-year-old who had learned to be careful about what she let herself need. Nell understood that more than most. Samuel came to the laundry himself the following Friday, which was not his usual day for it. He had, ostensibly, forgotten a shirt the previous week. Mrs. Pruitt, who had been running her business too long to believe in coincidences, handed it to him without comment and went to the back. He stood at the counter. "My children have been asking about you," he said. "Eli told me," Nell said. "Eli tells everyone everything. Grace is—" He paused. "Grace is more careful. I noticed. She asked me this morning if the lady from the hotel steps was going to stay in Redstone Falls." He looked at his hat. "I told her I didn't know." "I don't know either," Nell said. "I have work here now, but I don't have roots." "Roots grow when you stop moving," Samuel said. It was the most he'd said at once since she'd met him. She looked at him. He looked at the shirt in his hands. "I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking it in the right spirit, not as a business arrangement, not as anything. I'm not very good at the front end of this, so I'll get to what I mean and hope it comes out as I intend it." "All right," Nell said. "Would you come to supper at the ranch Saturday with the children?" He looked up. "Just supper. I'm asking you as a person, not a proposition." There was something in the direct simplicity of it that she had no armor against. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The Arden Ranch was 4 miles from town, set against the ridge with the creek along the south edge. The house was solid and well kept, but it had the quality that some houses have after loss. Everything in its right place, everything functional, and something essential gone, the way a room can be perfectly clean and still not feel warm. The kitchen showed a man who had learned to cook adequately and stopped there. The meals got made, the table was set, 4 chairs. Nell noticed and said nothing. Eli talked through most of the meal, which kept the silence from becoming awkward. He had views about many things, including the superiority of his horse over every other horse in the county, the questionable integrity of the schoolmaster's mathematics assignments, and the ongoing fence post feud between Judge the cattle hound and whatever it was about that particular post that Judge found objectionable. Grace ate carefully and watched everything. After supper, when the children had gone outside and the dishes had been done in a companionable silence that neither of them felt the need to fill, Samuel brought his coffee to the table and sat down and looked at it for a moment. "How long do you mean to stay?" he said. "In Redstone Falls." "I told you," I don't know. I know what you told me. He looked up. I'm asking what you want. Nell set down her cup. That's a harder question. I imagine it is. He was quiet for a moment. The honest answer from my side is that I was glad when you said you didn't know, because I don't know means you haven't decided to leave. She looked at him. He met it directly. I have a question. I'm not ready to ask, he said. But I find I keep hoping you'll be here when I am. The kitchen held that for a long moment. Outside, Eli was explaining something to Grace at significant volume. Judge was barking at the fence post. What kind of question? Nell said. The kind that changes things, one way or the other. I don't want to ask it before it's ready, and I don't want to wait so long that you stop being here to answer it. He looked at his coffee. I'm not good at this part. You're doing all right, Nell said. He looked up at that, surprised, and then something in his face eased, just slightly, the way a man eases when he's been holding a thing carefully for a long time, and someone tells him he can put it down for a minute. She went home to the hotel that night, thinking about the 4 chairs at the table. Not about what she was being offered, about what it would mean to say yes, and what it would mean to say no, and whether she could tell the difference between choosing something because it was right and choosing it because she was afraid of what it would mean to be alone. That was the question she had to answer first. Henry Sloane came to the laundry on a Thursday with shirts that didn't strictly need pressing and asked Nell if she would attend the Henderson social with him the following weekend. He was 41, the owner of the flour and feed depot, a solid, serious man with a good reputation and a kind manner. He had never been married. The town thought well of him. Mrs. Pruitt, who had clearly been keeping score, mentioned him on Friday, with the satisfaction of someone delivering relevant information. Henry Sloane is a steady man, she said. Good business, good standing. He wouldn't make your life difficult. Nell worked the iron steadily. That's a gentle way to recommend someone. It's an honest way. Mrs. Pruitt folded a sheet with the efficiency of someone who has folded 10,000 of them. He'd take care of you. Nell thought about that, the careful phrasing of it. Take care of you. What about Arden? She said. Mrs. Pruitt paused in her folding. Nate Arden is a good man, better man than most, but there's grief in the walls of that house, Nell. Catherine's been 2 years gone, and some of it hasn't moved yet. A woman walking into that has to be sure of herself. Nell pressed the shirt she was pressing and thought about the 4 chairs at the table, and the garden she'd seen out the kitchen window that had gone to weeds, and the way Grace had held her breath for the first 20 minutes on the bench before her shoulders finally came down. She thought about Henry Sloane, who would give her a house that had never held anyone else's grief, a clean beginning, the town's approval, safety in the practical, uncomplicated sense of the word. She thought about Samuel, who had shown her a dead garden the second time she came to his property, walked her past the barn and the pastures and the kitchen and finally out to the neglected plot behind the house and said, almost quietly, almost to himself, Catherine had a plan for this. I never, and stopped, and looked away. She thought about the way a man shows you the worst of what he's carrying, the parts he hasn't been able to fix, and what it means when he trusts you enough to do that. Safety and rightness were not the same word. She had known that for a long time. She had chosen safety before, in smaller ways, and it had left her exactly as alone as she'd been when she started. The Henderson social came and went. She thanked Henry Sloane for the invitation and told him she was not in the right place for company just now. He accepted this with the dignity of a man who could hear what he was actually being told and had the grace to respect it. It was 2 days after that when she went back to the ranch. She had not announced herself. She had simply walked out in the morning with her shawl and kept walking, because she knew what she needed to say, and she also knew that if she waited to feel ready, she would be waiting a long time. Samuel was at the north pasture fence when she came through the gate, replacing a broken rail with the steady, unhurried competence he brought to most things. He heard her coming and turned, and did not move toward her or away. Just waited, the way he always waited, with that particular patience that was not passive but deliberate. "I've been thinking about what you said," Nell said when she reached the fence. "I know," he said. "I need you to understand something first." She looked at him directly. "Henry Sloane asked to court me. I told him no, and I have work now. I'm not saying this next thing because I have nowhere else to go. I want that to be clear." He set down his hammer and gave her his full attention. "I'm saying yes," Nell said, "because Eli talks like the sky will fall if someone doesn't listen, and Grace holds her breath when she isn't sure she can trust yet, and I know what that feels like. Because you showed me a dead garden and I understood exactly what you were saying." She paused. "And because the first night, when you sent supper with your boy and went and stood at the end of the corridor so I wouldn't feel like I owed you anything, that's the kind of thing that tells you who a man is." Samuel was very still. She kept going, because she had started, and she was going to finish properly. "I've spent my whole life being necessary to people. I would like, once, to be chosen. That's what I'm asking from you. Not just someone who needs my help. Someone who actually wants me here." He was quiet for a long moment. A red-tailed hawk moved over the far pasture. Somewhere behind the barn, Judge was working himself up about something. "The first day," Samuel said, "when I came past the hotel and saw you on those steps, I almost kept walking. I told myself it wasn't my business. I got halfway down the street." "What stopped you?" Eli had already turned back. He looked at the fence rail in his hands. "But I would have turned back myself, because I saw you sitting the way I've sat. And I couldn't walk past that." He looked up. "I wanted you to know I didn't go back to that hotel the first night because I was doing a neighborly thing. I went back because I didn't know how to stop thinking about whether you'd had a meal." Nell looked at him. "I'm asking you here," he said, "not because we need a cook or a housekeeper or someone to manage the practical things, though God knows the practical things need managing. I'm asking because when you're in a room, the room is different, and I notice it when you're not." He reached for the direct thing, the way he always did. "I want you to stay, Nell, as my wife, as someone Grace and Eli choose as much as I do. You'd have to decide if that's something you want, and not just something that's convenient." "I already decided," Nell said. "That's why I walked out here this morning." Something changed in his face. The carefulness went out of it, just briefly, and what was underneath was something she hadn't seen before. Not the steady, measured man managing everything quietly, but someone relieved. Actually, simply relieved. "Ben asked the first question," he said, "but I think he and I had the same instinct." Nell smiled. "Eli." "Eli." He shook his head. "He's going to tell everyone this was his idea." Was he wrong? Samuel considered this. He wasn't wrong. They were married in December, in the Redstone Falls Church, on a morning when the snow on the peaks was new and the sky was the kind of blue that only happens in winter. Eli wore his good shirt and his expression of uncontained triumph, because as far as he was concerned, this outcome had been a foregone conclusion since the moment he walked up to a woman on some hotel steps and asked her a question that was none of his business. He told 3 separate people before the ceremony that the whole thing had been his doing. None of the 3 people argued with him. Grace stood very straight in a dress, with a ribbon in her hair, braided neatly, the same way she'd had it braided on the bench outside the laundry 3 months ago. She had asked Nell to do it. She had not said much about it beyond the asking. but she had sat very still throughout. And when it was done, she had looked in the small mirror Nell offered and touched it the same way she always did, with both hands, verifying. Henry Sloane was at the reception. He shook Samuel's hand and said something quiet that made Samuel nod, and then he told Nell he wished her well, and he meant it, and she could tell he meant it, and she was glad the world contained men like him even when they were not the right answer. January arrived, and the practical work began. Nell learned the ranch gradually, which pasture lost water in a dry summer, which horses had opinions that needed managing, that Eli cut corners on the evening feed when he thought no one was watching, not out of laziness but impatience. He was always in a hurry for the next thing, and that Grace, when she was upset, said nothing but went to the far corner of the porch with her knees pulled up. The right response was to bring her something hot and sit nearby without asking. Samuel drank his coffee too strong and let it go cold. He oiled the barn hinges and forgot the kitchen window latch. He was patient with cattle to a degree that suggested he had never once lost an argument with livestock. But Nell had her doubts. Nell did not try to remove Catherine from the house. This was a thing she had thought about. There were photographs and an apron that Grace sometimes touched but didn't use, and a Bible with Catherine's handwriting in the margins. There was the kitchen garden that had gone untended for 2 years. There were small things everywhere that were Catherine's, and the question of what to do with them. She left them where they were. She added her own things to the house gradually, beside them, not to replace, but to layer, the way a house that has been lived in for a long time layers one life on another until it holds all of them. Grace brought the apron to her one evening in February. She held it out with the particular seriousness she brought to important things. "This was Mama's," she said. "I know," Nell said. "Papa put it in the drawer after." Nell took it carefully. She looked at it, flower worn at the front, faded along one shoulder where the sun had come through the window. She folded it properly, the way you fold something with care, and handed it back. "Where should we keep it?" she said. Grace looked at her. "Don't you want to use it?" "It's not mine to use," Nell said. "It's yours to keep. We'll find it the right place." Grace thought about this with the seriousness she gave to most things. "On the hook," she said finally, "by the window. So it's still there, but nobody uses it wrong." "That's exactly right," Nell said. They hung it together, and Grace stood back and looked at it for a moment, and Nell saw something in her face that was not grief but something adjacent to it, the easing that happens when something you've been holding at arm's length because you were afraid of it finally gets to be held properly. The kitchen garden was Nell's first project. She started in late February, clearing the dead growth and the weeds, assessing what was still savable. Samuel came down the porch steps one afternoon without being asked and crouched beside the bed she was working. "Catherine had a plan for this," he said. "Drew it out the first spring. I still have it." He brought the drawing inside, a folded paper, the beds labeled, the planting schedule in small neat handwriting. Nell looked at it. "Some of this can still be done," she said. Not to copy her garden, to finish what she started. Different hands, same ground. She looked up at him. "That's not wrong." "No," he said, "it's not. The apple tree, Catherine's tree, planted the first spring they had the ranch, bloomed in April." Eli announced it with the energy he brought to everything good. Grace stood under it and didn't say much, which was how she processed things that mattered. In the fall, Nell made cake from the fruit of that tree. She did not make a ceremony of it. Eli ate 3 pieces and declared it the best thing he had tasted in his life. Grace ate hers quietly and said nothing until she was almost done, and then said, almost to herself, "Mama would have liked this." "I think so too," Nell said. Grace looked at her with that careful checking gaze and then went back to her cake. May came, and the evenings got long, and the porch held all four of them in the late light. Eli talked, because he always talked, about the horses and the creek and Judge's ongoing dispute with the fence post and whether the schoolmaster's hair was naturally that color. He talked the way he always had, like someone making sure the room knew it wasn't empty. Grace leaned against Nell and read her book. She had started doing this a few weeks ago, just leaning, not asking, not making it a thing. Nell had not commented on it. Some forms of trust don't want to be noticed. They just want to be allowed. Samuel sat with his coffee going cold and looked at the ridge where the last light was catching the snow. After a while, Nell looked up and found him watching her. She raised an eyebrow. He shook his head. "Just looking," the gesture said. "Don't mind me." She smiled and looked back at the ridge. She had come west on a letter from a woman who was already gone. She had arrived with one bag and enough money for 3 days and the particular kind of composure that meant she had decided crying wasn't useful and put it somewhere else to deal with later. She had not been looking for this. She had been looking for a room and work and a way to stop being necessary to people without ever being chosen by them. She had found all of that, and one or two things she hadn't known to look for. There are people who come into your life not through planning, but through timing, through the particular coincidence of two people being in exactly the right kind of pain at exactly the moment when someone else's honesty is the thing that saves them. You can't arrange that. You can only be present enough to recognize it. Eli Arden had not walked away. At 9 years old, with no tact and complete confidence, he had done what the adults around him were too careful to do. He had walked up to someone who was hurting and asked the question nobody asks, the one that cracks the wall just enough for light to get through. And Nell Hadley, holding herself together with both hands on the steps of a hotel in a town where she knew no one, had told the truth. Not because she felt safe, because the question was honest and she was too tired to be anything but honest back. That is sometimes how the best things start. Not with plans, with a child who doesn't know what he isn't supposed to say, and two adults who had each lost something and recognized in each other, across a street in a cold October, someone who was still standing anyway. You can't schedule that, but you can turn around. If this story found something in you tonight, let me know. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, I read them all, and subscribe if you want to keep finding your way back to this porch. The next story is already waiting. I'll see you there.